Sister Smerilli, thank you for welcoming us to the Dicastery for promoting integral human development. It's good to see you again. Our Holy Father, Pope Francis, loves the poor so much, and one of his goals in creating this Dicastery a few years ago was to see authentic human flourishing come to the poorest parts of the world. How does this Dicastery help him achieve that mission for the Church?
Well, thank you for these very important questions. As you know, the Dicastery is young, and we are trying to understand the core, what's the core of our mission. And we think that we can refer to Jesus' words, have come that may have life and have it to the full. Life to the full for everyone. And so, in our Dicastery, we are trying to promote integral human development, which means for us to help local churches, bishops, to remove the obstacle of human flourishing, and in this way to allow life to the full. And we know that this is not just something related to economy, to material poverty, is something bigger. Paul used the expression integral human development for meaning development for every person and for each dimension of the person. And so our job is to be at the service of the Pope and local churches to accompany the people of God in flourishing.
Why is it essential for Catholics to help both the person materially and spiritually? I think the Church has always done this in its 2,000-year history, but as you referred to that phrase, integral human development, it's rather young in the Church, in the long history of the Church, that particular phrase. Why is it important to help the total person, not just the material need?
Well, when we say human flourishing, we are saying the entire human being in all dimensions, as I was saying before. And the work of serving people is more than just alleviating material poverty. Material poverty is one dimension of poverty. There is cultural poverty, poverty in education, and poverty in spiritual life. And so we think, as Dicastery, it's a mistake to divide, to make a line between material poverty and other kinds of poverty. Because everything is connected, we are all connected, and so we believe our service should be for the entire person. I cannot flourish without relationship. I cannot flourish without being in touch with God and my inner self. And I cannot flourish if I don't have to eat. And we think all poverties are related, and we should be able to serve human beings in all dimensions of life.
Sister, last month the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith released a document entitled Dignitas Infinita on Human Dignity. One of the things it talked about was different types of dignity for the human person, and it referred to social dignity, which relates to a person's living conditions. Can you talk about how living in extreme poverty can affect someone's social dignity in their own eyes?
Well, I can refer to one of the first economists, Adam Smith, considered the father of the modern economic theory, and he was saying that I can be considered poor. One of the conditions is that if I go outside and I'm not wearing properly, and people will laugh at me, because the society don't recognize me being part of this society. So social dignity is the condition of being able to participate into the life of my community. And for this reason is an important part of dignitas, humana dignitas.
I wanted to ask you, the Dicastery is here in Rome, we have poor people all over the world. What metrics does the Dicastery use to measure the impact of its initiatives on integral human development?
Well, this is a difficult question because we are young as Dicastery. We are still reflecting on how to measure the impact we are having, and I'm not sure that we want to measure the impact in which way, because we believe, first of all, that our main task is to help local churches to help people. So we are not having direct impact in poverty situations. But at the same time, because we feel that it's important, some economists, they say, if you don't measure, you don't see if you are progressing, you don't see, you can't evaluate. And so we decided to have in our Dicastery a specific group called Evaluation and Planning, and they are helping us to try to understand which kind of indicators can help us to understand if we are doing our job in the right way. And these are not only quantitative measures, because if our goal, for example, is to establish bridges between local churches and the Dicastery, I can count how many meetings I had, but at the end we are establishing relationship, and I have to evaluate if these relationships are meaningful and if people can feel at home here at the Dicastery.
What would you say to generous Catholics in the United States who give very faithfully? They love the poor, they love God, they want to support initiatives to help the poor. How are faithful Catholics in the United States, donors across Catholic, how are they making an impact by donating?
I think, and we know this, that the first impact when we give something is on us. We feel that we can donate, so we recognize that we have gift to give to someone else, and this is important. And if we go back to the first Christian community, they were helping each other. St. Paul was asking for gifts from one community to another, because I remember one passage in which he says, you are rich in material, you have means, and you can give this to the other community, the Jerusalem community, which is poor in some way but is rich in faith, and they can confirm you in your faith. So I think that when we can give, it's very important to give. We can, with a little help, we can see the difference in some places, but at the same time, the gift is not complete without reciprocity, if we are not learning something from the others. And I think that you are good at this. I learned and I listened to different stories of what your people are doing, and it's good to continue.
Sister, that really resonates what you were saying there, because many of the missionaries that Cross Catholic Outreach supports in the developing world, they tell us that when they go to help the poor, those people in destitute poverty, they feel ministered to, because those people, the poor, are often closer to God. That the missionaries actually feel like they were the beneficiaries of that they receive, that reciprocity you were just talking about. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think through the synod process, we are learning this. We are learning that sometimes poverty, especially material poverty, can open our spirit to God and to receive. And so we are open to receive, but in this way we receive also the experience of God. For this reason, when it's important to listen to the poor, because they can say something that perhaps when we are not experiencing poverty, and especially material poverty, we are close because we know how to buy things. We can have whatever we want, and perhaps this can close our eyes, especially to the providence of God. The poor are at the heart of God, and they experience the providence, and so they can tell us something about this. For this reason, we can learn from the poor. Being in contact with a poor can enlighten us on what we have, which sometimes is more than what we need. And this can help us to open our heart and to leave a space for the providence in our life. And I think everyone should be exposed. When Pope Francis says that we should be with the poor, not only work for the poor, because we think we are doing something for them, but we learn that we are receiving a lot. And this can help the Christian community to be open, inclusive. And I hope that we can experience this more and more.
I want to switch focus to education. Cross Catholic Outreach supports 45 educational projects around the world. How important is education in alleviating poverty?
I think education is a fundamental driver for alleviating poverty, because first of all, through education, we can give people opportunities that they wouldn't have without participating in some processes. We can give them voice. We can help them to be part of a process of change, because if they recognize, they know what are their rights, how to fight injustice, and this can be reached through education. And education especially at early stages, because inequalities and differences grows along the years. So if we start early, we allow people to flourish without inequalities among people coming from, for example, same places, same towns. We have to recognize that today we cannot speak about poor countries and rich countries, because in every country, in every town, there are people left aside. And for this reason, education is one of the first drivers for fighting and alleviating poverty.
You mentioned Adam Smith earlier, and I know you have an impressive background in economics. When we look at the world today, you almost answered this just now, we see this great wealth gap in parts of the world. Some people are just very wealthy, and some people don't have enough food to feed their family. We're in the 21st century. Why do we still have this incredible wealth gap in the world?
Yes, and what is more is that this gap is increasing, and we apparently don't find ways to reduce the gap. And I think this is a failure of economics, economic models. And to be brief, I agree with Pope Francis when he says that we have to fight the technocratic paradigm, because I think this is the core. I have in mind economist Kate Raworth. She wrote a wonderful book called The Donuts Economics. And she says, if we want to change our models, we have to change the way in which we design models, we represent models. And she says, in our Western culture, in our economic models, we have just one kind of representation, which are these graphs like this, in which something is good if it's going towards the high, But this means no limits. And if I'm growing, I'm doing this most of the times at the expenses of the earth or other people. She says, if we represent our economies, our data in a donuts, and she says, we don't have to stay in the middle, in the hole, because this means that we are not fulfilling our basic needs. But we can't overcome the second circle of the donuts, because this means that we are consuming, producing too much, and the earth is not supporting us. And it's impossible that the entire population in the world can produce at the same level if we are outside. I think that if we learn this basic principle, trying to remain in equilibrium, we will reduce this gap. I know it can sound a bit theoretical, but there are lots of examples in which we can produce in harmony with nature and with other people without exploiting people, work, and so on, and at the same time making profits. It is possible, and this will reduce the gap.
I want to talk a little bit about your vocation. You're a member of the Salesian Sisters of Don Bosco, which is the largest congregation of women religious in the world. Tell us about your call to religious life.
Well, my call came when I was studying at high school. I was 16, I was good at school and so on. And the life was bigger, and then I was called to do something more. And so through prayer, discernment, accompaniment, I discovered that God perhaps was calling me. But at the beginning, I was skeptical. I said, why me? Please go and choose someone else. But at the end, I realized that it was me, and because I grew up in a Salesian youth center, I discovered that there was also a feminine branch, and so I tried, and I saw that this was fulfilling my inner call, that I was made for that. It's something that sometimes is difficult to explain. You just realize that you are made for this kind of life. And my dream was to stay with the poorest among the poor. But when I finished my novitiate, my superiors asked me to study economics, and I said, why? I didn't become a nun for being an expert in economics. And she said, now we don't understand this, but there will be a time in which economy will run the world and will be so important that we need a person very well prepared in order to understand from a cultural and educational point of view what to do. And so I said yes. And I discovered that I was passionate about economics. So for this reason, I continued my studies. And at the end, if I look to my story, looking from where I am now, I say this was the providence of God. I did something that I didn't want to do, but now, for what I'm requested to do as secretary in a dicastery, I feel that it was important for me even to study economics.
Pope Francis established World Day for the Poor 8 years ago. One of the many wonderful things he's given the poor of the world. What impact has that had on the church?
It's different to measure the impact, but I think the most important meaning of this World Day of the Poor is to remind to ourselves that the poor does exist, and that especially nowadays, each one of us is at risk to fall into poverty. And so, if we have in mind this and we pray for the poor, and if we remind to ourselves that poverty and the poor are among us, we can open our hearts, our minds, and we can do something. So for me, it's a sign that we shouldn't forget about poor.
The Holy Father has spoken about our journey to encounter the poor, saying, the Mother of God is ever at our side on this journey, that she's the mother of the poor and knows suffering. How can the Blessed Virgin Mary help us in recognizing the needs of the poor?
I remember the first Jesus sign in Cana. During Cana's wedding, Mary was the first one who understood that there was something missing. And I think Mary can help us to understand what are the needs of the poor and to have her eyes to recognize that sometimes there are basic needs, but sometimes, some other times, wine is missing. And this means that we are thirsty not only of something very basic, but for example, of the beauty. And our work with the poor should not forget, and Mary is helping us in not forgetting, that it is important also the way in which we help, the delicacy, the understanding of something that perhaps others don't see, and we can recognize that can be important for a person. And so I believe we should ask to have the same eyes of Mary.
Well, Sister Smerilli, I want to thank you for your hospitality today. You've been very generous with your time. So on behalf of everybody across Catholic Outreach, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I hope we can continue our work together. And I wish that you can fulfill the desire of God for every one of us, that we might have life and life to the full.